Good afternoon, everyone. My name is George Andreopoulos, and on behalf of the Department of Political Science and the Center for International Human Rights, I would like to welcome you all to today's event, which is a teaching on defending academic freedom. This is the fifth event that we are organizing this year in our academic freedom series. We have one more event that we originally scheduled, and this would have been held next month. It would have been a panel with university presidents and ex-university presidents. And the topic that we have asked them to address is the meaning of academic leadership in these difficult and challenging times. What does it really entail to be a leader of an institution that tries to stand up for some fundamental values that define the academy? Unfortunately, most of the presidents that ex-presidents we contacted were very busy and they could not come, so we will reschedule this event for the fall. We'll give them more of an advance notice, and hopefully we'll be able to hold that conversation next fall. So keep an eye for a message for that. Now, we started this endeavor for a very simple reason. The academy has been under attack for many years, but at the moment is undergoing an unprecedented and systematic attack. And we felt that it was vitally important to start a conversation in our institution on how we can ensure that academic space remains a space for reasoned and fact-based conversation in times of misinformation. Because if we cannot preserve this space in the academy, I don't know where we will be able to do so. And we have a special responsibility to that effect. And we formed a committee, and I want to acknowledge the members of the committee that worked diligently to organize this series of events throughout the year. My colleague Jerry Markovich, my colleague Veronica Michel, my colleague Avi Bornstein, and my colleague Carla Mundem. Each one of them was responsible for one of the events that we held throughout the year. And for this event, the lead person was Jerry Markovich, who worked with Laura Altinsoy, who is a doctoral student in our political science program. At the risk of sounding a bit Clintonian, you know, it takes a village to organize this series. So in addition to these colleagues that I acknowledge, I want also to acknowledge the support and assistance we received from the Office of Academic Programs, Andrew Sidman and Kat Alves. I want to thank them for the support throughout this series. And of course, all the participants that agreed to be part of this important conversation: Tony, Blanche, James, Tatiana, and Lou. We look forward to hearing what you have to say today. And I want to thank all of you for being with us this afternoon. And please stay engaged in this conversation, because as I say again, if we do not keep this space open for serious, informed, reasoned, and fact-based conversation, I don't know what other space will be able to undertake this task. We have a responsibility to be leaders in this endeavor. Thank you again for being with us this afternoon, and I'll give the floor now to my colleague Jerry to say a few things.
Gerald Markowitz, Distinguished Professor of History, John Jay College of Criminal Justice, approaches the podium.
And of course, our primary thanks is to George, who conceived this whole series and has insisted that we follow through our committee. So thank you, George. You know, as these past several years have transpired, and especially most recently, I keep coming back to a song from my youth that Pete Seeger and the Weavers used to sing, called "Wasn't That a Time?" And "Wasn't That a Time" goes through the variety of crises that America has faced. And the chorus is, "Wasn't that a time, wasn't that a time to try the soul of men, wasn't that a terrible time?" But it ends in a message of hope. And I hope that this panel also is a testament, really, to the fact that there is fight back. There is a different vision that we are pursuing. So the last two stanzas are, "Our faith cries out, we have no fear. We dare to reach our hand to other neighbors, far and near, to friends in every land. Isn't this a time? Isn't this a time? A time to free the soul of man. Isn't this a wonderful time?" So thank you all for agreeing to do this.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for all of you who came today, and thank you to Professor Andriopoulos. And as Professor Andriopoulos already said, this is an unprecedented time in terms of attacks on academic freedom and expression on and off campus. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself quickly. I'm Laura Atensoy. I'm a PhD student at the Graduate Center, focusing on international relations. So this teaching today to defend academic freedom is meant to explore the meaning and scope of what academic freedom means at a time like this. Mostly we understand academic freedom as a protection for faculty teaching in the classroom, right? But we also want to discuss that it extends to any kind of expression between faculty and students in the classroom or outside the classroom. I think what's also really important is this kind of generalized feeling of fear that we have at the moment that is going around, and a lot of people are self-censoring earlier than we really have to. I think it's important to fight back and to meet collectively and to think about what this really means. Also, what we want to think about today is how important student voices are for shaping university life at all universities, specifically at CUNY, right? So the panelists will also offer their thoughts on ways on how we can address the current moment and the unprecedented challenges that our academic community is facing right now. So we're going to keep roughly the order of the flyer. So the first person that is going to speak is Tony Alessandrini. He's professor of English at Kingsborough College and of Middle Eastern Studies at the CUNY Graduate Center. And he's also a member of the Committee on Globalization and Social Change. And most importantly, he is the chair of the PSC CUNY Academic Freedom Committee. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do this. Yeah, how's that? Thank you. Can you hear me? It's a crazy view. Sorry. Yeah, so I'm Tony Alessandrini, and thank you to all the organizers. I'm the chair. The most important thing for today is that I'm the chair of the PSC Academic Freedom Committee. Yeah, and I'm very grateful, as I say, to everyone who's organized this. I'm grateful to Laura for all the work she's done. And, you know, I want to nod in particular to Jerry and to Blanche, partly because they, in fact, preceded me on the Academic Freedom Committee. I feel like I've been on it for a long time, but they've been on it even, for an even longer time and have been doing the work for really decades. And Blanche in particular, because I want to talk a little bit about the history of student activism at CUNY, and Blanche Frozen-Cook is someone who's been at the center of that activism for, all this time. So it's very inspiring to be here with you all. Yeah. So what I want to, and I'll do what I do with my classes. So just to sort of ground us, just two acknowledgments. One, that we are on occupied and unceded native land, the land of the Lenape. and that we are in the midst of an ongoing genocide, which continues, and if anything, if you look at the papers, is intensifying, if anything. So let's, sort of have that ground, all the conversation we're having everywhere. What I want to talk about some today is academic freedom and student expression. And I'll start by saying that the classic definition of academic freedom doesn't include students, and for the following reason. And I'm going to argue against this. So it's sort of like this is sort of the classic definition. If you look back, for example, at the AAUP 1940 statement, which is sort of what kind of is the kind of gold standard, is that academic freedom is about a certain kind of expertise, right? Which is why it's connected to tenure. This sounds kind of snotty, and for a long time I was like, this is just like a snobby thing. But the argument is that a free society has an interest in letting experts do their work without interfering, even when they tell us things that we don't want to hear. I have high blood pressure and high cholesterol. I don't like the fact that I have to give up salty food because I like it, but I would rather know it. Right, it's important, right? So I mean that's the general argument for academic freedom, is linked to kind of expertise. And tenure exists so that you can't fire people when they say things to you that you don't want to hear, right? Even though they're true. I could say more about this. That's like a very schematic version, but the idea is that it's for the common good to have experts do their work without interference, political or otherwise. So what I want to say today is that, in fact, I think we need to extend even this classic definition to student expression. Generally, when we talk about student expression, we talk about it in terms of First Amendment rights, right? I mean, that there's a thing called academic freedom, but in fact, everybody at a public university, for example, has First Amendment rights, right? It should be able to freely speak, freely have free expression. But academic freedom, in a certain kind of way, is like, on top of that, we all have First Amendment rights, and some people have a recognizable set of academic freedom. I'm going to argue that needs to be extended for students for three reasons. And I should say, when we talk about, I probably don't have to belabor the point about the repression of student expression on campuses everywhere, but at CUNY in particular. I may just mention the name of Hadika Arzu Malik, who people may know was not just suspended for her expression, but has actually been, I think, unprecedentedly barred from all CUNY campuses. The law school students, if people are aware of this, have a petition going because, like many places, they are not allowed to have students speak at graduation anymore. I mean, this is, let's just say it, obscene. Like the notion that students, and what I went allowed like this because students speak at graduation. Like whether or not they're allowed to, they're gonna make their voices heard. But the notion that students, should not have a student speaker at graduation is like absurd and obscene, and, at a certain point, it's like, are we even a university anymore? But generally, when we fight against those things, we do it in the name of like the First Amendment, right? Well, they have a First Amendment right to speak. Well, okay, so the three things I want to say about students and academic freedom are as follows. First of all, and this is something we say in the union all the time, the working conditions of academic workers have everything to do with our students' learning conditions. So our working conditions are students' learning conditions, right? If an adjunct faculty member has to teach 6 classes in a semester at different campuses so that they can make ends meet, no matter how excellent they are as a teacher or a scholar, they're not going to be able to do their best work in each of those classes, and the students are the ones who suffer as a result of that, right? Our working conditions, and that applies to academic freedom too. If faculty are walking in the classroom self-censoring, if librarians are concerned about, book lists and what can we carry, and, if people are worried about their jobs, for doing their jobs, then students suffer. So that's the easiest one. The second is that the connection is really already there. I mean, and I could say this as chair of the Academic Freedom Committee. One of the things we're seeing is an increasing number of faculty members who are being repressed because precisely they're standing up for student expression. This is a great deal of the story. I have the Fired 4 t-shirt on. I mean, a lot of the story at Brooklyn College, not just around the 4 faculty members who were fired, but among other faculty members who have been disciplined, is because they stood up for students who were trying to express their political viewpoint. Same thing at John Jay, same thing at other campuses. Right down to faculty members being called in for disciplinary meetings because they reserved rooms for a film showing by students, right? So I mean, it's already the link between let's call it our academic freedom and students' academic freedom, is already there. It's already happening. We might as well just, name it and organize together around it. But the third and the most important one, and I'll just spend a minute on this and then I'll be done, is that students are an integral part of the work of the university. Students are also experts. So when we talk about academic freedom as linked to expertise, I think it's past time that we recognize that students are as much, in many ways, experts about the work of the university. And my evidence for this is the history of student activism at CUNY, right? In 1969, or after that, but let's use 1969 as a year, CUNY was still a segregated university, right? City College in 1969, the student body was 97% white, right? City College in the middle of Harlem in 1969 had a 97% white student body. CUNY desegregated and now kind of, promotes itself as diversity university because students demanded it, right? Students went on strike. Students basically demanded that the university represent the city, right? It be the people's university. Not just that, when we think about academic disciplines, many of the most important academic disciplines came as a result of direct student demands. There would not be Black or Latino studies. There would not be gender and feminist studies in the way that we now recognize it. There would not be queer studies. Even kind of what we now think of as like interdisciplinary studies. These all came as a result of student demands. And the demand was that the CUNY education represent minoritized communities, like represent the reality of everyone in the city. That's a fundamental way, transformation of the way the university works. That's what academic work is, right? Thinking about what our knowledge production should look like. So let me end, because I know one of the things we were asked to do is sort of like, what do we do? Like we're sort of, like what was the phrase? Sort of, what times these are and what do we do? So I'm going to draw a very pessimistic picture of how I experience the university. Students are configured as customers. Faculty and staff are configured as content providers and essentially doing customer service. And administrators are configured as managers. And if we want to look for the owners, it's basically whoever is pulling the purse strings, right? Whether it be, in the case of CUNY, like politicians. In other places, it's donors. In other places, it's board of trustees. That's how things stand. That's precisely the model. So when we talk about the university under attack, the only good news is that there's a lot of things in the current university that we don't want to defend. We actually want to transform. We want a university that's based around the work of, faculty and staff and students together, right? Not one that's determined by political fiat or by, finance or by donors or things like that. So I think part of the idea of thinking of the academic freedom of students is that faculty and students need to organize together for the university that we want to see. And I think that's the only reason to have academic freedom in the first place, is to do that. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. That was excellent. Can you hear me? Yep. Okay. We're going to continue with Louis Charbonneau, who did his PhD at the Graduate Center as well, teaches at City College, but is also the UN Director at Human Rights Watch. And before joining Human Rights Watch in 2016, he was a journalist for more than 2 decades, primarily working for Reuters. Thank you.
Thanks, and thanks to everyone for coming here and for organizing this really important discussion. As Laura just said, yeah, I work at Human Rights Watch. I'm UN director, but I'm also teaching at City College. So academic freedom is an issue that's close to my heart, and something that I learned recently. Human Rights Watch used to have an academic freedom program. We don't at the moment, but it's maybe one of those things we should think about reinstating. What does an attack on academic freedom in a country's universities look like? Here is a previously published description. Politically motivated attacks on dissident faculty and students were accompanied by damaging ideological and institutional constraints, including screening of faculty, restrictions on what could be discussed in seminars, limitations on autonomous organizational activity on campus, and restrictions on access to campuses by groups and individuals whose ideas did not meet the approval of state authorities. Anyone guess where this might have been or where it is? Close, but actually, and this is my first slide, this is from a 1998 report that Human Rights Watch published on academic freedom in Indonesia under the dictator Suharto. So today in the US, some of that sounds probably a little too close for comfort, and I will come to Florida. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that education should be available to all and should promote respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. In order for universities to do that, teachers and students, to come to Tony's point, need academic freedom. Academic freedom is closely tied to fundamental human rights guarantees. The freedom to pursue research and scholarship and discuss sometimes uncomfortable ideas without censorship and persecution is directly linked to the freedom to exercise basic civil and political rights in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Attacks on academic freedom in the US are real and worrying. PEN America found in a recent report that more than half of US college and university students now study in a state with at least one law or policy restricting what can be taught or how campuses can operate. We're all familiar with the crackdowns on US campuses regarding protests following the Israeli military onslaught on Gaza in the wake of the Hamas-led attacks in Israel on October 7, 2023. And I will come back to that. I want to start in Florida. And that brings me to my next slide, which is a report that Human Rights Watch published in 2024 called "Why Do They Hate Us So Much? Discriminatory Censorship Laws Harm Education in Florida." Florida has become a kind of laboratory for censorship, book bans, and restricting education in the US. To understand what the current US administration has been trying to do with universities, it's helpful to look at what Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and his administration have been doing for years in Florida, both at the kindergarten to 12th grade level, where governments have more authority, and at the university level. Based on Human Rights Watch's research, beginning in 2021, Florida passed laws and adopted policies that censor and distort the curriculum and educational environment of K through 12 classrooms in ways that are inconsistent with international human rights standards on education, access to information, and discrimination. This has led to the removal of information, instruction, and books from classrooms. Proponents of Florida's new laws claim that they seek to reform divisive and inappropriate school curricula, but they themselves are imposing a curriculum riddled by harmful gaps and inaccurate information that reinforce discrimination. Florida's discriminatory educational legal framework for K through 12 schools is primarily built on 3 laws: the Stop Woke Act, the so-called Don't Say Gay or Trans Act, and a third law that extends the Don't Say Gay or Trans law. The discriminatory educational censorship in Florida has prompted Florida teachers to stop or significantly circumscribe teaching students about LGBTQ subjects and racism in US history. It has caused many Florida public school students, particularly Black and LGBTQ students, to feel demoralized, unheard, and unseen by both the Florida state and the US federal government. It has fomented fear of reprisals in teachers and students asking critical questions or sharing divergent views on US history. It has prompted black students to ask, in the words of one of their teachers speaking to one of my colleagues, why do they hate us so much? Which is why it was the title of our report. The Trump administration's ideological assault began with what it claims is a fight against anti-Semitism on US college campuses. And here is a picture from Columbia University. I'm using photos that we've published on Human Rights Watch and have the right to use, so they're not always the best things, but to give you something to look at besides me. The Trump administration threatened and in several cases cut funding to elite universities across the US, including Columbia and Harvard, but also others. It often cited the failure to crack down on campus protests against the Israeli military assault on Gaza as proof of ignoring anti-Semitism. Some universities caved in to the administration's demands. Under pressure from the Trump administration, Columbia introduced the questionable step of adopting the problematic International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism, which Human Rights Watch, the American Civil Liberties Union, and dozens of other human rights and civil rights organizations, including Israeli and Palestinian groups, have warned is prone to misuse by those who conflate criticism of Israeli government policies and advocacy for Palestinian rights with anti-Semitism. And Tony has already talked about the Fired For, and there are leaflets about that here. So I'm not going to go in that. But again, CUNY has a storied history of campus protests that should be remembered and respected, and it should continue. But it was never really about combating anti-Semitism, a very real problem like Islamophobia, homophobia, racism, and other forms of intolerance that the Trump administration has not prioritized. The demands the administration put on universities showed it was more about suppressing ideas they associate with what they call woke ideologies. The main demands centered on several key issues, such as admission policies aimed at supporting racial diversity, trans and LGBTQ rights, gender studies programs, teaching critical race theories, numbers of foreign students. The University of Maine came into the administration's crosshairs because of, among other things, a floating offshore wind program. In fact, views that the Trump administration considers to fall under the term woke feel a bit like what communism was for the witch hunts of the McCarthy era, a kind of all-purpose catch-anyone accusations. And you don't need academics or the panelists like me and others here to make the McCarthy comparison. Laura Loomer, the far-right political activist and top ally of President Trump, said it herself. She said, Joe McCarthy was right. We need to make McCarthy great again. The Trump administration's crusade against language and ideas it doesn't like isn't confined to US universities, law firms, media, or non-governmental organizations. In my work at Human Rights Watch, I've seen the Trump administration doing it with the United Nations and its member states. The US delegation works hard in negotiations on resolutions, declarations, and texts to remove words like gender, climate, racism, diversity. Unsurprisingly, this has inspired self-censorship, the kind that Laura referred to. Last year, in a futile effort to prevent defunding by the Trump administration, the UN's International Organization for Migration started scrubbing its website of language that could be associated with diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI programs. The Trump administration defunded it anyway, but along with most of the UN. But fortunately, UN officials told their agencies to stop doing that and to not do any scrubbing because they're going to lose their money anyway, but at least they can keep their integrity. But there's some good news. as we were asked to bring. So the Commission on the Status of Women, and let me skip to this. So here's the UN. The Commission on the Status of Women, which is the UN's main forum for women's rights, is currently meeting in New York. Last week, the US demanded the removal of all references to gender, sexual and reproductive health and rights from the draft outcome document. Not only did the US fail, they cast the sole vote against it. Its adoption prompted multiple rounds of applause that must have been humiliating for the US delegation. Obviously, fighting government attempts to restrict academic freedom isn't like voting on a UN outcome document, but we can take inspiration from those who push back. It's up to us to protect academic freedom, to stand up for the brave students and faculty who speak truth to power, to make sure that McCarthy stays where he belongs, in the trash can of history. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Lou. We're going to continue with Tatiana Cozzarelli. She's a PhD student at Urban Ed and the grad center CUNY, and she writes about the new McCarthyism. And she's also a member of the Fired For campaign and a member of Left Voice.
What's up, guys? If y'all can't hear me in the back, just like wave your arms around or something so that you can hear me. But yeah, thanks so much to everyone who's spoken. Thanks so much for inviting me. My name is Tatiana. I'm in the Urban Ed department at the CUNY Grad Center. I'm writing my dissertation on the new McCarthyism. I'm a member of Left Voice, and I've been sort of covering the struggle around the CUNY Fired For, which is kind of what I'm going to talk about today. And I'm part of the campaign to reinstate the CUNY Fired For. And just before I even start talking, I encourage everyone to follow the campaign on Instagram, Reinstate CUNY Fired For. And also there are flyers for folks to sign the petition to reinstate the Fired Fourth, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And I'm going to echo a lot of what other panelists talked about. I think the question of students and academic workers together fighting against this new McCarthyism, and also thinking about what kind of, and imagining and fighting for the kind of university we want is really important. I think the question of academic freedom, as folks have mentioned, is not, and as we've seen right now during the Trump administration, our rights are not immutable. Like it depends on politics, it depends on struggle, and it depends on what we do, whether we get to keep the few rights we have and what rights we can win based on our struggles. And so I think that this question of McCarthyism and the new McCarthyism is kind of what I want to talk about. So I want to take us back for a second to 1950, right? Is, McCarthy era. On Brooklyn College's campus, there was a student newspaper called The Vanguard. And it was the school newspaper, actually. And that student newspaper, it was speaking against ROTC on campus. It was questioning the president of the university, who was trying to, sort of stack departments with people who were, stood with him and his politics. And so that newspaper was putting out a bunch of articles about that stuff. And so the president of Brooklyn College said, "You're not allowed to publish The Vanguard anymore." He said that to the student newspaper. And so the students and some of the faculty with them were like, "The heck? Heck no, we're not going to do that." So what they did is they collected money together, the students and some of the faculty together, and they published not The Vanguard, but the Dragnov, Vanguard spelled backwards. And they distributed it outside of Brooklyn College campus. And as a result, 6 students were suspended for conduct unbecoming. That's an important term. We're going to come back to that. And dozens of faculty were also reprimanded. And so that's 1950, right? And that's after the Rapco Dare Committee, which in the 40s had actually investigated and actually fired and gotten rid, purged CUNY of a bunch of faculty who were either, were said to be affiliated with the Communist Party, right? And so this is kind of the height of McCarthyism. And actually, CUNY actually apologized to a bunch of those professors who they fired in the 40s. They were like, oh, we're so sorry. But, you know, CUNY's doing the same thing now, so I don't know how sorry they really are. But anyway, we coming back to this term, the term conduct unbecoming, which is what these students were suspended for. And conduct unbecoming was the term, that is the term that they used during the Rapp-Coderre Committee and the McCarthy era to get rid of like socialist, communist, leftist professors. If you didn't have anything on a professor, what did you accuse them of? You accused them of conduct unbecoming, right? And so now, that was our little history lesson, right? So now we're coming to today. And I think, you know, folks have been talking a lot about the repression that we're seeing in Florida of students. And I want to just highlight one thing, is that the repression we're seeing right now is an escalation, but it's not new. The Palestine exception to free speech has been around. And I think that part of what we're seeing is that if we don't stand up at the first instance, they're going to come for more, right? If you don't stand up for the folks who are speaking out around Palestine, then they're going to come for folks who are speaking out around Black struggle, LGBT rights. It doesn't ever stop at one person or one issue, right? And so coming to today, 2025, right? You know, Brooklyn College campus. 4 adjuncts were fired from Brooklyn College, all who were involved in the movement for Palestine, all who had supported a student protest that was on campus, with the goal of really protecting students from the police, because we had seen the kind of repression that the police had unleashed on students at Columbia, at City College, you know, across the country. And after, you know, this, you know, these adjuncts were fired over the summer. 3 were non-reappointed. But that's fired, y'all, okay? Non-reappointed is this term that they use to get rid of adjuncts, but because adjuncts are precarious labor, because, you know, we have, as adjuncts, we have very few rights, because of, you know, neoliberalism has created these tiers of professors. But in reality, you know, when adjuncts get non-reappointed, that's fired, yo. So anyway, so three adjuncts, they got non-reappointed, right? Above the chairs of their departments, and who wanted them to come back. And one of them, of these 4, who were all involved in the movement for Palestine, who all had stellar faculty and student evaluations, one of them was, she was fired, and she was fired for conduct unbecoming. And she had worked at CUNY for 9 years. No disciplinary issues, 9 years, y'all. And in that case, because this person was fired, CUNY was forced to give a reason. The other 3, CUNY didn't have to give a reason. And so CUNY is saying that she was fired for receiving a $5 donation from a faculty member in support of an independently published socialist pamphlet. So we go, you know, this all full circle here, and which included CUNY in the title, and it also, yeah. So that's what that person was fired for, and we were in a moment that's in some ways really shows the potential of this moment, because 3 of the 4 of these fired for, these CUNY fired for, were reinstated. So 3 of the 4 were reinstated, but the 4th, this person with the $5 donation, the terrible crime, she has not been reinstated. And not just has she not been reinstated, she's been banned from working at every single CUNY campus. And so, and this is, you know, part of an onslaught that we've seen at CUNY around repression. At Brooklyn College also, 5 faculty and 1 staff member were also investigated for having been present, or allegedly having been present, because some of them weren't even there, they got investigated anyway, for allegedly having been present at this student protest. We've had students suspended also. like Hadika Arzumalik, which folks have already spoken about. There's a really important McCarthyist scholar. Her name is Ellen Schrecker. She says that we're in a moment that's worse than McCarthyism. And I think part of that is true because we're in a moment where it's the Trump administration is coming for the university. It's coming for, and especially folks who study the history and reality of oppressed and working class people. It's coming for university funding. And that's all true. At the same time, I want to say that I'm not sure, I don't know if it's worse than McCarthyism, because what I feel really inspired by is the fact that there is a movement fighting back. And the fact that 3 people have been reinstated here at CUNY is a product of that movement, is a product of the efforts, for example, of the PSC, our union, but also of like students and workers uniting and talking to their classmates about what's going on, which is why I want to encourage everybody here also to talk about the Fired Fourth, tell people that this is happening, because it matters what we do, right? What happens to academic freedom, in part, it depends on what kind of fight we put up. And what happens to academic freedom here at CUNY depends on what kind of fight we put up. And lastly, I just want to say, and I'll end here, is that I think in this moment where we're being so repressed, I also think, like I was mentioning, the kind of attacks on academic freedom have occurred in the past. Sometimes the Democrats do it too, right? Let's be honest. But it also is a moment where we can also put forward not just the defense of the university status quo, which has also, like I was mentioning, also, could be repressive but we can also put forward a vision of the kind of university we want, right? Maybe a university that's free, maybe a university that's public, maybe a university that's not run by the millionaires in the board of trustees, but that's run by, folks like us in the room having dialogue with each other about what do we want, what do we need. A university that's in the service of, our communities, and not in the service of, the war, the U.S. war machine in the midst of, this, war with Iran, which I didn't even get to. But I think it's a moment to also fight against repression, but also put forward a new vision of the university. That's it.
Thank you so much, Tati. We're going to continue with James Davis, who is a president of the Professional Staff Congress and CUNY's Faculty Staff Union and a professor of English at Brooklyn College. I'm going to get setting up the presentation now.
Oh, great. This advances.
Yeah, this advances and there's a laser.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you to the committee for holding this amazing discussion. How many folks are here who are students? Any students here? Great to see you. How many, do we have any adjunct faculty? Fantastic. How about full-time faculty? Any professional staff? Amazing. What's up, Lisa? It's great to be with you and on this amazing panel. I think that the key questions, as my colleagues have expressed, are what's going on, what's behind this attack, and how can we beat it? How can we oppose the attacks and build safeguards? And to take it a step further, as my colleagues have said, build something better. The status quo was vulnerable and it wasn't serving us well beforehand. So how do we build something better? And this is not going to be the focus of what I speak about, but I do think it's important that we take in that the overwhelming majority of the faculty at CUNY and beyond, but especially at faculty, have zero access to job security. They're on contingent part-time appointments. And as others have said, that in and of itself erodes academic freedom. And the reason academic freedom is so critical to everything that we do at the university is it is in the service of the public good to have experts in their fields, trained in their fields, to be able to teach and conduct research in the direction that the truth of their discipline takes them. That's in everyone's benefit. So it's also students' freedom to learn as much as it is faculty's freedom to teach and to conduct research, and staff to the extent that their work also takes them through curriculum. I think it's really important for us to take in the fact that this didn't start with, where do I point my pointer? Sorry.
The down.
Point it at this. The down arrow. Okay. This did not start with Trump, right? And that's very important because there are a lot of interests that are aligning strategically now to enter into an opening that Trump and the trifecta of the Republican Party, and it's true what Tatiana just said, but we're not lionizing the Democrats and vilifying the Republicans, but there's a major opening right now that is entered into by an alignment between otherwise distinct forces, but it's important to think about who those forces are and how they're entering now. So before I get particular, there's a couple illustrative examples I want to emphasize. This alignment is between what I would describe as kind of classic libertarianism, one. Two, anti-democratic, literal, and now they say the quiet part out loud, don't they? Literal anti-democratic forces that are trying to roll back the gains of the last 50 years of the civil rights era. They don't even pretend otherwise. That is now also aligned too with, and it's strategic alignment, right, with U.S. imperialism and extractive corporate, run amok. So those are not identical forces, but they are finding an opportunity under the Trump administration to come after universities and really go after them in extortionate ways. So I want to give an example here of a piece of legislation that has, the ideas of which have been in the pipeline for a while. These are think tanks: Goldwater Institute, Defending Education, James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. You can go and find them on the internet. You can see, what their funding looks like, what their history looks like. They're in North Carolina, Arizona, and I can't remember, Virginia. And the American Higher Education Restoration Act is just one example of the kind of inroads that have been percolating for a long time. And sometimes you hear the talking heads on the news, people like May Mailman, who kind of ran through the White House this kind of compact, they called it, for academic excellence, right? And you hear Christopher Rufo, who's kind of right-wing activist, right? And these are the folks who are out front leading this charge, but on the back end are these kinds of think tanks. So what is the American Higher Education Restoration Act seeking to do? And to be clear, this is a template that's written so that multiple states around the country, and it hasn't come yet to New York State, right? But the idea here is to try to replicate certain principles to enact. Well, what are these organizations? They have websites and slogans that appear very innocuous, if not benign, right? Goldwater Institute is interested in enacting laws that empower all Americans to live freer, happier lives. Who could possibly object to that? And the Statue of Liberty, right? But you dig in a little bit and you see they conduct studies like this one. This is where their funding goes to. They published an article recently, December last year, called Peer Review Gone Wild. Any political scientists in the room? I see a couple of you. Flagship political science journal shows how academic gatekeepers promote ideology over scholarship. That's a very important binary in this discourse, ideology versus scholarship, right? Defending Education, who we are. You can't read it from where you are, but I'll just tell you, as you can see from the picture, very wholesome. They only want good things for all of us and our families. They restore schools at all levels from activists imposing harmful agendas. We fight indoctrination in classrooms and on campus to promote the reestablishment of a quality, non-political education for all students. They're fighting against indoctrination and for a non-political education for all students, allegedly, right? Because here, if you go to another part of their website, they've got a map of the whole United States where indoctrination is going wild, including locations, right, across the map. There are problems everywhere, they say, but there are also people fighting back. Okay. And then, I'm not going to read you about the whole James G. Martin Center, but they're a voice for excellence and accountability in higher education, not only in their home state of Virginia, but everywhere around the country. They advocate responsible governance, viewpoint diversity, academic quality in teaching and learning, and the sting is always in the tail, innovative market-based reform. But so on the face of it, you know, they sound innocuous or benign. And here's what the American Higher Education Restoration Act, these are the 4 planks of the platform, and I'll go into them a little bit, and then I want to talk a little bit about some litigation that's been successful. So these are the 4 pieces of the American Higher Education Restoration Act. 1, tenure for excellence in instruction of Americanism and Western civilization. 2, increased teaching responsibility for faculty. 3, the financial allowance for taxpayer-supported research. And 4, restoring the authority of the governing board to making hiring decisions. I just want to spend a second on each of these things because it's a real mishmash of stuff that relies primarily on a mythology about what it is that faculty do and don't do. But it's a whole mishmash of stuff in the service of a very pernicious agenda to undermine shared governance, which is faculty and sometimes students and administration collaborating on programs and financial decisions, right? And eroding academic freedom as well. So tenure for excellence in instruction of Americanism and Western civilization means to these organizations, faculty who teach a foundational education in Americanism and Western civilization shall be eligible to apply for tenure, including expedited tenure in addition to other pathways prescribed for the general faculty. So these folks don't want to do away with tenure, which, by the way, Oklahoma is in the process of doing, right? But they want to add an additional layer, which is you don't have to conduct any research if you can demonstrate that you're excellent in teaching in a particular approach to American history, politics, society, etc., which upholds and valorizes quote-unquote Western civilization, you can get tenure, right? Research-free. Evaluation, and this is where I say it's a mishmash, evaluation of somebody's tenure application under teaching should also consider the rigor of the courses, the extent to which they've met the governing board's adopted standards. So we're locating authority in the governing board, right, not at the college level, but also the number of student homework hours per credit. So I say this because, again, it's a mishmash. The value seems to be here to be placed on the rigor of the course, right? As if the bad kinds of courses that this is meant to push out are not rigorous courses or don't assign enough homework. Number 2, increased teaching responsibility for the faculty. This is to go after the fact that public taxpayer money allegedly is going to fund all kinds of people's careers who don't do enough teaching. So this act would be, beginning in the 2026-27 school year, would require 18 credit hours per year of instruction, or six courses a year, 3 classes a semester. Every single faculty member at a publicly funded institution in whatever state adopts this legislation would have to teach at that level. That's pretty normal, actually, at CUNY. At the community colleges, it's actually higher than this. Lecturers, it's higher than this. But the point here is to do a carve-out, if you read this language closely, a carve-out for STEM and medicine. They can teach a lot less, right? So STEM and medicine, they can teach less, but everybody else, humanities, social sciences, etc., you've got to teach at least 3 and 3. You can apply. Many of you had political science who raised your hand before. By the way, you don't count as science. Even though it's in your title, there's actually a footnote to this act that says political science and quote-unquote social science doesn't count as science. And you can apply for a waiver from this law, 2 years at a time. And you just have to submit your research topics. To whom? To the state taxpayer-funded research award committee. It's very important to these people that any mention of the word research comes preceded by the phrase taxpayer funded, because they want to remind everyone out there that it's you, individual taxpayer, that's funding this professor's research, that professor's research, because it delegitimizes research. It's not publicly funded dollars. It's not research for the public good. It's taxpayer funded research. Technically true, right? But the semantics are very important politically here. So you just have to submit your research topic. And who's on that board? You guessed it. The chair of the Board of Regents, the chair of the House and Senate Appropriations Committee, the people who control all the money at the state level, the governor, the state treasurer. So this is not an application to your faculty, personnel, and budget committee, or even to your president. It's to the folks in our state. It would be in Albany, right? Breathtaking, major change in how research is validated. Oh yeah, and then if you're a taxpayer in a state that has this law, of course, if you're the attorney general, you can file a lawsuit, but you individually could file a lawsuit if you believe that any public institution faculty member is illegitimately failing to teach their required 18 credit hours per year, except in STEM or medicine, right? Incredible. Okay, I'm going to wind up on this. Restoring the authority of the governing board to make hiring decisions. This is really astonishing, right? The governing board shall approve or deny each faculty position to be posted or otherwise advertised at each institution, except within academic units in STEM or medicine, right? Or, this is the other exception, if you're in one of those Americanism and Western civilization programs, then you don't need the position of the governing board to post an open position. I want to remind you, these are the groups whose slogans, right, and whose mission statements talk about freedom of speech, right? Talk about viewpoint diversity, talk about freedom from indoctrination. And yet, what the legislation actually promotes is deeply slanted, right? Ideologically and discipline-wise. Okay, and as I said before, they explicitly say this. If you want, you can add this to your legislation. Science doesn't include sociology, political science, or other social sciences. So how do we oppose, and my time is short, so I'm not going to talk about most of these, but my colleagues have mentioned them before. We have to litigate aggressively. We have to legislate against these kinds of legislations, and we have to organize. Tatiana put it in terms of struggle, and I'm only going to mention one piece about litigation. I'm not going to talk, as conversation permits, we can talk about all of these, but I want to call people's attention. We're at a College of Criminal Justice, so I thought I'd focus on some lawsuits. I'm only going to talk about one of them. If you have a chance, after we leave here today, if you're not familiar with these lawsuits, read about them. AUP versus Rubio was settled in Massachusetts, AFT versus Department of Education settled in Maryland, and AUP versus Trump in District Court in California. Very, very important litigation. The last one was the most recent. This was when the Trump administration went after the entire UCLA $1.1 billion in grant funding from the federal government, irrespective of discipline. Incredible. But the courts, in their wisdom, shut that down. Did the Trump administration go away? No, they did not. They're now, as of last month, suing the University of California, Los Angeles for failing to protect Jewish members of their community. But really important decisions here. I want to just say one thing about AFT versus Department of Ed. Last February, and I know my time is probably up, right? Okay, so last February, a so-called dear colleague, again, sounds lovely, right? Dear colleague, anything but. The Department of Education issued a dear colleague letter that said that the Trump administration would withhold federal funding from any school, K-12 or higher education, right, that taught lessons acknowledging race, supported students of diverse backgrounds, or programs to support diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they invoked Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act as a justification for threatening to withhold this funding. Erroneous interpretation, but very, very dangerous. And just to skip ahead to the end, the AFT, along with some other organizations, sued the Trump administration. And in August, a Maryland district court found that colleague letter and the certification report that went along with it to be unlawful. They shut it down. And so they affirmed that discussing race in a school setting is lawful, including teaching and learning about structural racism. It is lawful to appropriately promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that is still the law of the land, and those orders were invalidated across the entire country. But as I mentioned earlier, the Trump administration does not go away. They keep coming back with new kinds of lawsuits and threats. Okay, good, my last slide. So it's very, very important, right, that we continue to litigate, but also, as my colleagues on the panel have said, organize, right, talk, struggle together. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, James. And we're going to end with Blanche Reason-Cook, who's a distinguished professor emeritus from John Jay of Criminal Justice and the Grad Center. And then I hope we're going to get to a Q&A at the end. So please think about your questions and ideally keep it short so as many people as possible can speak. Thank you.
I'm really very moved to be here, and I'm so grateful that you are all here. And Jerry and I had a great mentor whose name was Annette Rubinstein. And she was an organizer and a warrior. And she always had a motto, life, thank you. Life is about the struggle. So almost everything I wanted to talk about has been talked about. So I want to talk about how we can continue our struggle, how we need to organize. I always say, being a kid from the Bronx, never go anywhere without your gang. And there's never go anywhere without your gang. And we need to organize for unity. We need to organize our gangs. And we need to fight these creatures. Let me be clear. We are living for the first time in U.S. history under a fascist regime. This man is a moron, monster, tyrant. I'm glad I've retired because I'm going to say these things. And if you look at what he's doing, I have a whole lot of articles I was going to refer to, but I'm not going to. If you look at what he's doing, he's following the Hitlerian playbook. He's burning books and banning books and closing libraries and closing research centers and closing museums and closing archives. And I don't understand why so many colleges are closing themselves on their own. And I don't quite understand the money situation. Harvard, Columbia, giving him millions of dollars so he will what? Well, we now know some of the money for research was restored after the creature got millions of dollars. But the bottom line is, for everything we care about, for everything that is about learning, we need to fight. We need to organize. We need to build groups. The scariest thing going on, in addition to the closing of schools, museums, archives, and centers of learning, is the new head of the FCC, who said he will delegitimize, delicense any public program on the radio, on television, in the film industry, who make noises he doesn't want to hear. What is going on here? It's fascism, and the only way to fight fascism is to look at our own history. We have a wonderful history. I brought a book I put together, Crystal Eastman on Women and Revolution. She was a founder of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom during World War I, which had the first Red Scare, the Espionage Act of 1915, and Crystal Eastman organized what became the American Civil Liberties Union. So we have the ACLU, and we have the Center for Constitutional Rights. And that's what we need above all. And we have our union. And Jerry and I are members of the Organization of American Historians, which had an organization that we ran called the Freedom of Information Act. There was once a time everything we wanted to know was secret. And I did a book on Eisenhower, and everything I wanted to know about Guatemala was unavailable. It was secret. And so I flew back from Kansas, and I called a meeting of my friend, my gang, and I said, what the hell is going on here? Nothing important is available to us. Not the overthrow of Iran in 1953 by the overthrow of a very learned man, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh. It wasn't available. And so my gang said, well, we should have a Freedom of Information Act. And I called my friend Bella Abzug. She was in Congress. And she introduced the Freedom of Information Act. So we need friends, and we need allies, and we need our gang. And we have the Freedom of Information Act. Today, we have it. Now they're trying to make it irrelevant because they're closing all the places, all the archives where the information is. How creepy is that? So we're in a struggle. This is a struggle for your generation. You got to mobilize. Life is about the struggle. Let's have a conversation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for all the speakers. That was so good. Now we have a quick second for Q&A. I think a little bit longer than 10 minutes. So just raise your hand and I'll come around with the microphone. Great. Yeah. Oh, no, I'll do it. Yeah, sit down. I'm not sure exactly how it works.
Hi. I'm curious how you would respond if a group of students at John Jay, and this actually happened, approached the faculty and said they want to organize a club for Turning Point USA. How do we respond as a college to that request? I mean, it's an issue of academic freedom in a way. So I'm just curious how you, I mean, this actually happened. How would you folks respond to that?
Who wants to? Yeah. Okay, let's do a couple.
Well, this takes us in a different direction, so it's going to make it difficult for the panel. But as you pointed out, huge number of the teaching faculty at CUNY and around the country have no job security at all and are on precarious contingent appointments. In fact, with this onslaught, full-time faculty with tenure and adjunct faculty without it are closer and closer together because full-time faculty are sort of contingents in waiting as they're. But we know that the 4 who were fired and lost their jobs were adjunct faculty because they had no protection within. So the question is isn't one of our priorities, we have so many that we have to tackle, but isn't one of them that every organization, every contract, every labor fight has to seek strong job security for those who lack it, and that's a foundation for us to be able to have academic freedom. So, I mean, we have a lot of priorities. Just one last point. There's a new committee that was formed by AAUP, and it's headed by Brian Sachs. And one of the reasons it was formed, the title is Contingency in the Profession. So AAUP has been, as James pointed out, an organization that has fought for academic freedom and done legal suits successfully. So they have formed this new committee to try to tackle this issue.
Okay, let's take one from over there. Thank you.
Hello, I'm a student. I just have a general question about lately, have you guys talked about censorships and what's going on? So I was thinking about what is your opinion that is going on in Florida about Ruby Bridges, the infamous that is going on? Parents are suing schools about the history of Black people and everything else. Yeah.
Great, let's do 3 questions at a time, and then we do the responses now. And then more questions. Who wants to start?
So maybe I can talk about the Florida one and state my personal opinion. I'm Lou Charbonneau at Human Rights Watch and adjunct at City College. Personally, my view on Turning Point USA, yeah, why not? I mean, we should have all a diversity of views. People shouldn't agree, this idea. I mean, those who say, you should, having discussions shouldn't always be comfortable. Absolutely, right? But we shouldn't be shutting down one side of the conversation and then allowing the other side to go, it's like it needs to be freedom, and the freedom should be spread around. That's my personal view, and others might not agree. And then with Florida, I mean, there's a lot that one could say about the situation in Florida. I mean, the fact is like, there was that benchmark document that was put out that said that you could talk about the beneficial aspects of slavery that caused a lot of concern. It hasn't actually, I mean, I've been discussing this with my colleagues who've been doing a lot of research on this, and it's not clear that it's actually had an impact in the way that people are teaching, but the amount of self-censorship, and it's very difficult, very difficult to quantify self-censorship, right? How do we go out and gather data about self-censorship? Because if people are self-censoring, they're not going to respond to surveys and interviews. They're going to be worried, or maybe some people will, but it creates serious problems. So we can't, quantifying it is difficult, but we know it's happening. And we've, based on interviews and anecdotal information that we have, out there, but yeah, litigation, fighting back, keep going at the courts. With a lot of these things, the administration's track record is not great, but at the same time, they are trying to replace judges and doing things like that. It's the old trick. But yeah, litigate, fight, expose, and not give up, and organize, as everyone's been saying.
Yeah, thanks. I'll try to go 1, 2, 3 actually, and I think I have a connection as you were talking. Turning Point USA. I mean, the reality is that they're not going to come to the faculty and say, "Can we?" That there is. I mean, the way the neoliberal university works is that there's a student affairs committee, which is mostly administrative. Like they right. I don't think anybody would have a difficulty in creating a Turning Point USA if they wanted to, if they went to the administration and asked for it. Would I be like a faculty, advisor for that? Hell no. But in other words, it's not really even a question of censorship. It's just so. Because of that, that means, for example, we know, because we've studied this, that Student for Justice for Palestine chapters at different campuses are treated fundamentally differently from other groups, Black student groups, and you can go down the list, right? So I mean, the problem starts there, that it's not about as a community, let's sort of talk about what kinds of clubs we have. It's right, so that's one part of it. Maybe not unrelated, the tenure question. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, fundamentally, academic freedom is based on tenure, full stop, period. So I mean, I think that is the fight. If you're fighting for tenure, you're fighting for, there's no separation between them, which a little bit maybe comes to the like the question you raised, and I appreciate it so much. Part of the reason, I appreciated James's presentation. Part of the reason that there's this fight to get rid of tenure, let the board of trustees, is because they have lost the intellectual fight. You will not find any legitimate historian of slavery who will make an argument that there's anything good about slavery. They have lost that. They've lost it since the days of W.B. Du Bois. And they know that if they keep it in their hands, they will never succeed. There's a reason why viewpoint diversity is being pushed. It's because when the Trump administration has to put out an executive statement saying race is a real thing, it's not socially constructed, they have lost that. They've lost it. That's why they have to pass laws. So I think that's why they're very closely related. They have no intellectual leg to stand on, and therefore all they can do is try to pass laws saying you have to say slavery is good, because they know they can't make any case for it.
Yeah, and starting from that point, what I was saying in the presentation about what happens being related to politics and struggle, I think the attacks on the teaching of Black history, the attacks on the teaching of Black struggle are absolutely the product of the mass social movement, the biggest in the history of the United States, which was Black Lives Matter 2020. And that uprising, that mobilization that mobilized people all over the country, Black-led but multiracial, protest mobilization that questioned institutional racism, that questioned the police, that questioned police funding, they questioned pillars of the way that capitalism works. I think that the Republicans, but I mentioned the Democrats are complicit too in their own ways. We're terrified, and so they passed these laws because they are terrified of the power that people demonstrated, and that's what I think is going on in Florida. Yes, adjuncts, we should. The academic freedom is linked to having job security, and adjuncts have no job security. And the majority of professors at CUNY are adjuncts, and we have to fight against that. And I think we have to fight against that every contract, and we have to fight against that preparing to use our greatest weapon as workers, which is to strike, which, we can talk about that later. We're not going to talk about that now, but I do think that. And then lastly, about Turning Point USA. My opinion is that Turning Point USA has no place at CUNY or any college campus. It is a absolutely terrible, racist, far-right institution that is actually a danger to other students and faculty. With that said, that doesn't mean that I believe that the administration is some sort of neutral arbiter here. They're not. As Tony was highlighting, SJPs get shut down all the time, right? And in fact, nobody's asking me if I think, you know what I mean? It's not that it's up to a vote. It's not that we get to decide here, right? And so I think for us, do I think we have to mobilize against the far right on our campuses? Yeah, I think we do. But I also think that that's not the same as expecting that the CUNY administration will somehow intervene on our behalf. In fact, the CUNY administration is intervening on the opposite side. The CUNY administration is firing faculty. The CUNY administration is, barring students from speaking at graduation. And so I don't see it from the perspective of demands on the institution per se, but I see it more from the perspective of what should we be saying to each other and how should we be organizing,
Okay, we're basically out of time. I'm going to grab one more question, and then Professor Andriopoulos would like to say some more words. Thank you. I'm sorry, we can't do all of the questions. I'll grab both of you guys, and then everybody just keep it super short, please.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Michelle. Nice to be here. I wrote my question down so I could hurry it up. You guys emphasized protecting freedom of speech for pro-Palestinian activists. My question was, how do you address situations where rhetoric for these protests target Jewish students and where Jewish students and Israeli students feel uncomfortable on college campuses? And where do you draw the line between free expression and speech that incite harassment and violence?
Thank you. Okay, one more question, and then that's it for Q&A.
How you guys doing? My name is Javier Simpson. I'm a student. And I wanted to ask, as we continue to navigate these persistent and unprecedented times with digital evolution, which is closely tied to self-censorship with things like cancel culture, what would be a piece of advice from people that didn't grow up with the digital age to the youth to help really mobilize that struggle, that fight that you spoke about, and get out of that digital echo chamber that people like to sit in so comfortably?
Excellent, yeah. Please keep it as short as possible.
I want to answer both questions. There's a group called JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace. And the Jewish Voice for Peace, which I'm a member of, we make it very clear that Jewish people do not necessarily support Netanyahu and the killing of the people of Gaza, and we are opposed to it. And so everywhere we go, we have to be very clear. What do we stand for? Now, if you are, sometimes I say, a double Z Zionist, and you support Israel and its support for the killing of the people of Palestine and Gaza particularly, that's one thing. But we have to make a distinction. And we have to speak out. So that's what we have to do. We have to speak out. And the good news is all around the world, there are these great crises. You mentioned the Commission on the Status of Women meeting at the United Nations. There are women here from only 40 nations because the U.S. failed to give visas to women from Africa. So nobody is here from about 40 nations. There were supposed to be 90 women. And I was at a meeting of these women, and they are fabulous all over the world. And all over the world, everybody is struggling. Where should the UN be located? Maybe it can't be located any longer in the United States. And there's a discussion, maybe the UN should move to Ghana or to Kenya. And maybe that will happen. So this is a global situation. And when we are activists and we bring our gang together, we have to bring our global gang together. We have to all work together, hearts up, fists up, hearts open, shoulder to shoulder, into the future.
We'll just finish with some remarks by Professor Andriopoulos. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to the speakers and to all those who came this afternoon to join us for our concluding event. Just want to make a brief announcement that there is an event coming up on the 24th of March that will address the issue of art under the Nazi regime, legal and ethical dimensions of the restitution of stolen art, and would be addressed by Nicholas O'Donnell, who is a partner in Sullivan at Worcester firm and has worked extensively on this, with commentary by our very own colleague Erin Thompson from the Department of Art and Music. As I said at the beginning, this is the last event in our series, although it was intended as the penultimate event. The conversation and the struggle will continue. So I very much hope that you'll join us next year for our panel discussion with university presidents, because it will be very important to hear what they feel they should be doing, what they are doing, and hopefully offer some explanations if there is a gap between expectations and delivery. but we'll have to wait, of course, for that discussion. And I want again to thank all my colleagues for making this series and working with me throughout the year to keep this important conversation going on our college campus. And by way of conclusion, I want to thank my assistant at the center, Maria Simonetti, who has been indispensable for the organization of these events.
A graphics animates onto screen with a call to action. Follow at John Jay College on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.